Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today we got the biggest single piece of news that will come out for the Heist League, and that is the patch notes. These are the things that outline major balance changes that are happening with the game with the new league. And there's been a few things that have been teased over the last week. In particular, yesterday the information was revealed that we should expect nerfs to the Necromancer and the Assassin, and there's exact details of that here. I want to go through these, but firstly, I want to say that this is worth reading yourself. This is probably the smallest set of patch notes that we've had in terms of it having less sweeping changes that affect a lot of builds. Essentially, if you weren't playing a super meta build last league, then you can probably continue playing it exactly as it was, whereas there's been more thoroughgoing changes in a number of other leagues. However, there's still things that you want to look for. Firstly, I did the obligatory Control F Headhunter as the first search that I did when I got here, and there were no changes listed to that unique item. So, first up it just talks about the Heist Challenge League in general. This is just a broad overview of what to expect. I've already covered that in previous content. This is just there for people that have missed that. Next up is the major new content and features, which is mostly about the new skill gems, and as well stating the numbers of unique items. So there are 118 total unique items, 28 of them completely new, and 90 of them that are replicas. There are 11 new divination cards. Divination cards often get underrated by a lot of the community. They can have a big impact on what maps people run. For instance, I don't think that there would be all that many people running either Burial Chambers or Tower if it weren't for the fact that they have divination cards for Headhunter in them. They'd still be okay maps, but that makes them some of the most popular maps in the game. Likewise, there's a number of other divination cards that inspire people to run specific choices of maps. Alleyways, for instance, people run because it drops the Saint's Treasure with a moderate drop rate. And the only reason anyone runs Vale Temple at all is because it's got the best divination cards in the game. So, there are more than 800 alternate quality variants of new and existing support and skill gems. And there's this little line at the bottom: added a vendor recipe for a special support gem. Good luck. I'm pretty sure that this means selling the replica version of Bitter Dream, and that will give you a bunch of different support gems. Just like when you sell a normal Bitter Dream, it gives you 6 support gems that are part of the that are the ones that are used by the weapon. The replica Bitter Dream should include the elemental penetration skill gem, which can't be sourced through other means. That's what I think is the case. However, there have been some other weird and wonderful support gem recipes added in the past. Like there's a Blink and Mirror Arrow. Blink Arrow and Mirror Arrow, I think, can be turned into each other via a recipe that I don't even know. Although I think it's just one GCP plus one of them, and it'll then turn in for the other one of the gems. So Blink Arrow plus one GCP gives you a Mirror Arrow, or vice versa, I think. And then there's also one for a PvP only one, block chance reduction. So, minor new content and features is all about graphical changes. The one that I like the most, I think, is the divination cards that award an Elder Slayer influenced item will now have special background effects. These look cool. The artwork on the divination cards is extraordinary, and it looks better when it's animated. But the big change here for people who are summoner players is going to be the permanent minions persisting through logout. And most importantly, persisting through accidental disconnection. There is nothing worse than disconnecting because your internet's as bad as mine is here in Australia, and suddenly you've then got to go, oh, I've got to cast all my zombies again. So that should hopefully be a lot better for people who play those builds. Okay, so next up there's the character balance section. There's some discussion of the projectile changing here. This is a slight buff to effects that split projectiles, and a slightly bigger buff to effects that allow projectiles to return. If you are playing as a skill that can't do either of those, then it won't do anything. If you're playing a build that has pierces on their skills, this won't do anything. But for many projectile builds, this will allow a few new options. And so that's the first thing that's mentioned here. And then there's a couple of changes to intensity, which will be dealt with later, and to a couple of real corner cases where players could become invisible to enemies. Essentially, the changes to intensity are a buff to the Intensify support gem, and also provide new sources of getting it. And the concept of reduced visibility to enemies is something that was never really used by players except for ridiculous borderline exploit tricks that are now dead. Skill reworks. Curses have been completely overhauled. I've discussed this a bit in the past, but we got a little bit more information. So it appears that Doom, the new numbered Doom, is the new mechanic Doom, is essentially a percentage increase to the amount of effect that a curse has. And it goes up by 10 per second, and there will be some sort of Doom limit on curses. So that is what is going to happen with the curses that are AoE, the ones that are not changing the single target. The other thing that's been clarified is the way that the marks, which are the new single target curses, and now these used to be AoE curses, they're being transformed to be a single target curse instead of an AoE one. So things like Poacher's Mark is no longer an AoE curse, it is now a single target one. But what's happening with those is that they take up one of your curse limit on an enemy, but you are hard capped at having one of them as well. So if you've got a curse limit of 3, that can be 3 hexes on an enemy, or it can be 2 hexes plus 1 mark, but it can't be 1 hex plus 2 marks. Next up, we've got the steel skills are being overhauled. I've discussed those separately. They don't do anything for me. They're probably actually quite good, but they just didn't jump out at me as exciting, so I'm not looking to play them. Assassin's Mark is being changed. Now, this is being changed from an AoE curse to a single target curse. It no longer causes cursed enemies to take increased damage from critical strikes. Cursed enemies now always grant a power charge when slain. Hits against cursed enemies now have plus 1.5% base critical strike chance at all gem levels. So that's interesting in that it means that it allows you to more reliably inflict critical strikes against enemies against bosses while you are leveling up. Like while you're in a situation where your build hasn't yet come together, you're not able to get your critical strike into the sort of 50 to 70% range where it starts feeling really good. This will provide a buff at that point where going from, say, 20% critical strike chance to 30% will actually matter. So this will allow you to get some benefits from critical strikes while leveling if you decide to play an assassin still. Hits against cursed enemies now have 30% extra crit multi at level 1, up to 49% at level 20. So in conjunction with the first line, this is essentially a nerf at high gear level and a buff at low gear level, but mostly and also it's a nerf at medium gear level as well. Essentially, for most players, you will lose critical strike multiplier overall, even against targets that you have Assassin's Mark on. Cursed enemies now grant lots of life when you kill them, and a fair bit of mana, and they also have a chance, based upon the quality of the gem, to grant you a power charge on hit. Now, this is interesting. This is the only source this is the way that you can sustain power charges against bosses with Assassin's Mark. It's meaningful, but given that it's only 5% at 20 quality, I don't think that it's enough on its own. You'll want to have some other source of power charge to sustain as well. Poacher's Mark is essentially a dexterity-aligned version of the new Assassin's Mark. So it gives you frenzy charges when you kill the enemies. Enemies grant you life and mana on hit. So that's life and mana on hit rather than on kill. And it now adds physical damage to hits against cursed enemies. There are definitely some uses for this. If you are playing a build that has incredible scaling of physical damage from hits, such as Facebreaker builds, or if you're playing a build that runs something like Void Forge or Doomfletcher's Prism, this is going to be extremely strong as a result. Now, the other thing that's noticeable is that it causes cursed enemies to give you a chance to grant frenzy charges. Again, 5% chance at 20 quality. Poacher's Mark is an interesting one in that it sort of makes enemies take more physical damage. I can see this being used on impale champions, particularly bow-based impale champions. Although it can be, it is not a bow exclusive skill. It's just that bow ones tend to be able to get just so many hits per second. And I can also see this finding uses, like I said, in conjunction with weapons like Void Forge. Sniper's Mark. This is what used to be known as Proj Weakness, and it is being changed substantially. This is kind of cool. It's gaining some advantages of the projectile rework that was discussed earlier. So projectiles which hit cursed enemies now split towards 3 additional targets at gem level 1, up to 4 additional targets at gem level 20. What this means is that essentially Sniper's Mark is all about making it so that when you are hitting an enemy, a powerful enemy, you have damage projection against trash around them. So for instance, if you were to be using a Sniper's Mark on a boss, you could just fire on the boss, and if that boss then summons adds, you'll also hit the adds. This will be really good on the Elder's portals, amongst other things. So you would Sniper's Mark the portal itself, then you would fire at the portal, and it would instantly split off and hit and probably kill all of the trash monsters around as well. So I think this has got some definite power to it. There's also increased damage from projectile hits, which is really significant because this is the way that this is worded. This is not your character dealing increased damage, which you've got a lot of increased damage already. This is the monster taking increased damage. This is something like the monster. This scales in the same way that the monster being on shock ground does, and so this is really looking strong. I think essentially Sniper's Mark, the former projectile weakness, has changed its identity completely, but that any character that is using a bow should seriously consider using this for the ability to deal increased damage with projectile hits here. Additionally, whilst this seems to all be about bows, there's actually nothing stopping you from using it with projectile-based spells. So if you were doing a hit-based fireball character that doesn't really try to ignite, then this is a fairly strong option as well. Warlord's Mark is interesting in that it has the new ability, Cursed Enemies now grant 5 rage over 1 second when they are stunned. This is intriguing in that you're going to be torn between, do I put the Warlord's Mark on the weaker enemy in a pack and then basically kill it too quickly and then want to reallocate the Warlord's Mark somewhere else? Or do I put it on the toughest enemy and not benefit from this as often because it's harder to stun those tougher enemies? That's going to be something we're just going to have to play around with to see. But hits against cursed enemies have a chance to double stun duration, and that chance goes high. This will be interesting. I think that this is the sort of thing that may find some uses, but I'm just not sure yet. We've got to play around with it. Lancing Steel, Shattering Steel have been overhauled. Those ones didn't excite me. They're probably quite good, but I haven't gone into them. But I really need to see how they feel when actually played with. Firestorm has had its massive overhaul. Now, the damage numbers on this look derisory until you factor in that the first impact has 100% more area of effect. So that means roughly 41% more radius. So if the base radius is 20, then the radius of the first impact is going to be 28, and it deals double and a half the damage. That's actually a lot, but it's still considerably less hit damage than Fireball. That means that I would not see this being likely to be used for ignites. I do think there's a skill coming up later that will be used for ignites, but it won't be Firestorm. Firestorm looks like you want to play a fire spell hit build, and you want to be doing a lot of small hits. Where it's always excelled. That's where it's going to continue to excel. I don't know how good it's going to be. It's going to be something we're just going to have to play around with and see. But you are capped at 3 Firestorms at a time, which is designed so that the new ones replace the oldest ones, which is going to change the way you scale a skill. You're no longer going to want to play with duration at all. Instead, you're just going to want to focus on firing off Firestorms when you are safe to do so, and bunching up enemies to hit as many as possible with them. Next up we have Glacial Cascade. This skill was very popular with mines. The only reason that we didn't really see Glacial Cascade Mines as a top tier skill in recent leagues is that Ball Lightning Mines were better. Now Ball Lightning is being nerfed, and I think that Ball Lightning Mines is, I don't know if it's dead as a build, but it's not exciting me anymore. However, Glacial Cascade's changes have some interesting effect on Glacial Cascade miners. I still think Glacial Cascade mines are very strong. However, there's been a couple of big changes. Firstly, the skill has a shorter cast time and less damage. That usually means that it's no longer suitable for using with mines. One of the key advantages of mines is that essentially the cast time of the skill is irrelevant. And that's why long cast time skills like Arc, like Glacial Cascade and Ball Lightning pre-changes, why those were so popular with them. However, the other things that mines allow you to do is simply just fire off a lot of the skill at once. And with the new Glacial Cascade, what you can do is drop a whole bunch of mines at a very carefully chosen location, then detonate them. And the idea is that you want the final spike of the Glacial Cascade to land, on the boss that you're trying to kill. If you can do that, if you can work out the area properly and manage that that higher skill cap element of this skill, then at that point you should expect to get really strong damage from this through mines. The other thing that's changed with Glacial Cascade is that you now get 100% conversion of physical to cold damage baseline. It used to be that it was 60% converted, and as a result, it was really quite hard to scale this skill. The other thing that needs to be said is that it's gaining knockback. Knockback is sometimes beneficial, sometimes a drawback, and it's something that you'll have to play around with. But with a skill that does so much more damage at the extreme edge of its range, it's probably actually beneficial. I'm keen to try Glacial Cascade Mines now. I have run them long ago, but that was before, that was a different era of how mines worked. Mines have changed a lot since then, and effectively I feel that they'd be somewhat of a new build. Glacial Cascade Mines is looking like something that could be a league start potential for me, but the key thing is that you will need to be very confident that you can carefully manage your positioning of your mines so that you're getting this 200% more damage, this triple damage on the final spike. Because without that triple damage, these numbers are derisory. I think currently the numbers for Glacial Cascade are something like 1.5 times these. So the damage is down a lot on everything except that final spike. But that final spike, ooh, it's going to hurt things. Additionally, Glacial Cascade, by virtue of dealing cold damage and dealing 200% more damage on the end, you should be able to inflict some pretty savage slows, some pretty savage chills and freezes there. Discharge. We've seen a video of the new Discharge, which I'll provide a link to. Discharge is now something that is, essentially it's a thoroughgoing rework, but the old version of the Discharge will still be in the game. So the old version will now require a threshold jewel. That's the almost no cooldown version of the skill that just goes boom, 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 and does lots of small little explosions if on builds that can generate extreme numbers of charges. The changes though to Discharge are that it has a much larger area of effect if you aren't using that threshold jewel, and it just deals staggering amounts of damage. Like, we're talking unbelievably high base damage. All you need is 2 endurance charges that you detonate, and you've got a discharge that's much bigger than a fireball. But of course, you're not limited to 2. Nothing at all is limiting you to 2. In fact, you could you could stack up to 8 or 9 endurance charges with really heavy investment. And I think that that's going to be a popular way to play this build. I think there's a lot of space now for chieftain builds that find some solution to generating charges. And I'm not sure exactly what that solution will be. these builds will mostly not be discharge builds. There'll be some other sort of ignite build, but when they need to do really heavy damage, they'll detonate all of their accumulated endurance charges in one massive explosion, and everything that's hit by that will be engulfed in an ignite proliferation, absolute carnage ignite proliferation. Additionally, it's not only endurance charges that you can use, and I will say though, sorry, I should just add in that there is this line, 30% less damage with ailments. That's fine. That is fine. You're doing so much damage that you don't really care about 30% less. You do have the other options though of scaling the lightning damage from power charges, which has been one of the traditional strengths of discharge builds, and that tends to be done on assassins. Assassins are still really good despite the nerfs they're getting in this patch, and that should be viable. And then you could also use Vol's Devotion to get some benefit from the fire damage as well. And finally, there's the cold damage from frenzy charges. This has been a little bit harder to take advantage of in the past, but I do think that a big critical strike from a cold damage discharge is going to freeze anything. So if you can stack frenzy charges somehow, then kaboom. In terms of the ways that you would probably go about building this, the first option will be to find some solution for frenzy charge generation and go an assassin using the Badge of the Brotherhood unique amulet. Badge of the Brotherhood can be quite expensive, but it should be cheaper this league than it was last league because Blight is on the Zana map device, and that makes it easier to source. So that's the first thought that I've got. You'll have maximum power charges every time you fire off discharge, and then additionally you'll have some degree of frenzy charges. Sometimes you'll have maximum, sometimes you won't. Alternately, you could use Vol's Devotion instead, and then have some ridiculous number of power charges plus 3 endurance charges. So that's the first thought that I've got. The second thought that I've got is a Guardian that doesn't use discharge as their main skill. So you have a Guardian build that runs some other 6-link, maybe Ethereal Knives. I'd have to work out what you'd be scaling here, but you want something that hits a lot of the screen. But you then have discharge socketed into a Frost Ferno in your helmet, and then if enemies start really swarming you, then kaboom, discharge goes off, enemies all go boom. So that's a couple of options that are in mind. I do think discharge could be fun this league, but it's going to be a new meta for working out what to do with it. Punishment is now a hex. It's a curse, so we'll call it a hex by the new name. That is looking really good. Causes cursed enemies to take increased damage while on low life, starting at 50% up to 88% at gem level 20. This is much better than the mod sounds. So the reason for that is that this is the same layer of stacking of damage as Shocked Ground. It's hard to get any large quantities there, and this is going to mean that anyone that is fighting Izaro early in the league definitely manually cast punishment on him, because punishment is going to be absurd. The overkill damage is only 10%. That spreads, but this is like having the benefits of Herald of Ash, just a little bit weaker. I think overall this is like, using this with Blasphemy is going to be like having Herald of Ash, but can be used on builds that can't use Herald of Ash because they're not doing physical damage. I think overall punishment is looking pretty strong, and I'd be keen to test it out in the new league. Vitality is being changed to be very similar to Clarity, and there's some massive nerfs to Watcher's Eyes related to it later. Skill balance here, there's very little that's changing in this section, in the general skills, so this section's pretty trivial. Ball Lightning is getting nerfed. Clarity is going to require lower stat requirements. You'll see that with some of the other auras as well. All of the curses, I won't go through them all, except to say that they broadly all do look quite a bit better when self-cast. So, Enduring Cry is suffering some minor nerfs. It should still be really good, but the key thing is that you can no longer just essentially automate it to the left mouse button key. It's now more strategic as to when to use it, rather than just something you can use all the time. Enfeeble looks like it's getting an overall nerf, but I do need to see it in practice. That said, it is going to still reduce the damage that you take from enemies, and it will still be powerful if you use it early in a fight, and it gets a chance to build up Doom. What's really suffering here is Enfeeble Blasphemy, and the same with Temporal Chains when we get to that. Phase Run is part of the stealth changes. Phase Run is probably getting one of the more serious nerfs in those stealth changes, but it's still good. It's still got all of its real uses. Precision is losing its strength requirement, which will help a few builds out, and has a different dexterity requirement, which will I think the dexterity requirement is currently higher than that, so I think that will be an improvement there. So yeah, Temporal Chains is going to be a little bit less effective on Blasphemy, and probably a bit stronger when you manually cast it. And Vulnerability is going to be a lot less dangerous when afflicted on players, I think. That said, I do need to see it. It's got this ailments inflicted on cursed enemies inflict damage faster. I just need to check the numbers on this, but I think broadly speaking, Vulnerability might be a little bit less scary when used on us. Vile Skill Rebalance. These will be better for all use cases except the most broken ones, the Vile Impurities. But that said, no one's going to use them anyway. Okay, so support gem changes. These basically saying that Curse on Hit support is being renamed Hex Touch, and it's losing the ability to apply mark skills, which we sort of knew was coming. Intensify is getting better. Deathmark is just being renamed to Predator, and Spellslinger is being gutted. I was discussing this with other people over the last day. I think that the change to Spellslinger will render it useless except for its most powerful use case, and that most powerful use case is Volatile Dead linked to Unleash. Sorry, not Unleash, Spell Cascade or Awaken Spell Cascade. I think that Spellslinger with Volatile Dead will still be solid, but all other uses are probably gone. Possibly, though, it could still be good as a way of triggering skills like the Wave of Conviction, where you don't care about the damage, you just care about the debuff that it inflicts. Next up, we have the passive tree balance. There's a new keystone being added that allows you to curse the ground instead of cursing enemies directly. Doomsday. This is pretty niche. I think that the game is too fast-paced for this to be good, but maybe in the future, maybe against certain bosses you'd want it, but there's it's one of those problems where keystones against single bosses it's not usually something people use. Glancing Blows is basically taking a bullet that it's taking a bullet for the various recover X on block mechanics. Those are getting a lifeline. Recover life, recover energy shield, recover mana on block. Those probably should have taken the nerf instead, but they've decided to go softly and nerf Glancing Blows instead. If this nerf doesn't kill off doesn't address just how powerful the synergy between Glancing Blows and Recover X on block is, then I think we will expect to see much more severe nerfs next time. Divine Flesh is being nerfed, and you're going to need to get more maximum chaos resistance elsewhere. It's still possible to do, it's just going to take higher investment to make Divine Flesh extraordinarily powerful. However, it's still really good. And I think that we'll still see most people will still use a Glorious Vanity because Divine Flesh and Corrupted Soul are just so good in the Timeless Dual nodes. There's a number of other minor changes here that are basically around providing support for curse changes and updating the curse mods for that effect. There's various changes that are being made to marks in the southeast area of the Ranger tree, and these allow there's a few additional options here. I think that in general people aren't going to use marks on trash enemies much. It will mostly be on bosses, and reducing the cast time will be something that will be good there. Next up, we have some hard numbers on the assassin changes. Deadly Infusion is still really good. Even at even with about a quarter of its power stripped away, it's still really, really good. It's still a no-brainer to take, and it's still a compelling reason to choose Assassin. There's also less critical strike multiplier that Assassins sort of get for free. But that said, Assassin's still in a really good place. It may even be that it is still so good that it renders other choices not worth considering. That's my first thoughts. I was expecting a more severe nerf than that. Here we've got the Mistress of Sacrifice nerfs we knew were coming as well. In the item balance section, there's a bunch of changes that relate to the item modifiers tags. This is a massive overhaul that's been done to fix some of the complaints people had during Harvest, and that's its own, like that would be its own entire discussion. But the key functional changes are that bound fossils now increase the likelihood of rolling curse modifiers, so that's a genuine change. And faceted fossils now increase the likelihood of rolling other gem-related modifiers. Some of which, I don't think there's any of them yet, but there may be some more of them in the future. Life regen mods are more powerful and more rare. Both of these are buffs because they're still, like the fact that they're more rare is going to be a positive because we still aren't going to want them very much. And the Crusader influenced items can no longer roll a physical damage conversion mod if the item already has one. This is a big change to the utility of incursion sourced gloves. I think this was the most powerful use of Crusader Exalted Orbs as well, and I think it's just one of those interactions that is being changed in a way that I think will still be fine, but it's definitely weaker than it used to be. Okay, Labyrinth enchants on Vitality have gotten better. They needed to, even with the changes to Vitality. And then there's the Glacial Cascade conversion enchant is being changed to something better. Well, something that's now better. 6-10% of physical added as extra cold. Existing items with this enchantment are unaffected, which is unfortunate for me if I ever log back into Standard because I had a pretty good helmet base with Glacial Cascade from a previous league that I had never looked at again. Okay, class balance changes. Minion crits are being nerfed a bit. That's the main change here. Also, Vengeful Commander is being nerfed. That's the aura stacking effect. Again, it's not very powerful at the lower end of investment, but this was something that was just breaking the game wide open at the top end, and so as a result, it's taking a bit of a haircut. Most people will still want to roll over Vengeful Commander anyway. They probably already wanted to, but now it's going to be more important. But the most powerful uses of it are gone. Okay, in terms of other changes, there's a number of changes to unique items that are all pretty minor in my opinion. Chimera's Avarice has gotten better. That item was pretty bad, but maybe that's enough. Maybe. Gluttony is being changed completely because Poacher's Mark on hit is no longer really a thing. You can only have Poacher's Mark on one enemy. And there's a number of other changes that are being made that are not particularly important here. So Putrid Cloister is no longer applying Proj Weakness to players because Proj Weakness has been partially removed. It's now implying Despair instead. Watcher's Eye, though. A lot of the most powerful Watcher's Eye mods are getting gutted. These are not mods that you will have had unless you've been able to buy 50 Exalt Watcher's Eyes in the past. But basically, the 50 Exalt plus Watcher's Eyes are getting a gutting, and the ones that are 5 to 10 mirrors in a temporary league are getting absolutely savaged. That said, Watcher's Eye will still be a jewel that is too powerful not to use. Whispering Ice is being overhauled. I really want to reserve judgment on this until people have started playing with it. But broadly speaking, I think it probably looks a little bit weaker than it used to be. And it no longer will have some of the crazy shenanigans with Arcanist brand that used to be able to crash people's computers in public parties. Monster changes. The Redemption Sentries are getting nerfed. Bosses throughout Path of Exile take full effect from marks. So all of the curses that are being changed to single target, those ones now have full effect on bosses. And yeah, there's a bunch of other little things, but nothing significant except for this: dread wheels. Dread wheels are going to be faster on maps with fleet. This is going to be terrifying, absolutely terrifying. These monsters are already dangerous. They're the most dangerous thing in blighted maps. They're the most dangerous thing in Act 6, and they're going to get nastier when you find them in maps. Get ready to see people rip to these things. Lastly, there's I've discussed the Xanamods. There's an Atlas shuffle again, and this will be interesting to see what happens. Basically, some maps that you were used to encountering early in your character's progression will be ones that will be put off until later on. Other ones will be available earlier than last league. We don't really know yet what is going to be the overall feel here. A little bug that made the Ancient Architect in the Pier map much more deadly than intended has been fixed, and the other thing that needs to be said with these Atlas changes is that it may impact what maps can be easily sourced with Horizon Orbs. Horizon Orbs can be used to turn Tier 16 maps you don't want to run in the current state of the Atlas into promenades with a 1 in 4 chance, and as a result, any Tier 16 map can be turned into a very popular map with an average of 4 Horizon Orbs. That may no longer be the case, and there may be no super popular maps at certain tiers. We'll have to find that out. Blight towers are getting buffed considerably. This is interesting. Blight towers already felt like they were in a really good place to me. This is just going to make them stronger. It's going to make the ring enchantments even more impactful in Blight content. And yeah, I think particularly the scout towers, like those scouts from the scout towers already felt like they did massive damage. Basically, I think the goal here may be to bring everything up to the current power level of flamethrower towers for anti-trash work, or meteor towers for anti-boss work, and this certainly looks like it will do that. These are going to be really strong. Incursion changes are Nif-Naf and Trivia as the Delve ones, just that you won't encounter Legion encounters below monster level 68 anymore. And then the big one though, the auto-reply command persists across area transitions finally. This is the biggest quality of life change in the entire patch. Finally, there's some info on where to get the new gems in the quest rewards, and there's a couple of bug fixes that are here. Some of these will be things that you won't have ever encountered. Some of them will be there. Anyways, that is the patch notes. There are less game transforming changes than I was expecting here. There are no sweeping nerfs that are going to ruin existing builds. Existing assassin builds will be fine. The only things that are really going to be hammered are people who were playing necromancers and relying upon abusing Mistress of Sacrifice to its maximum. Those builds are probably dead on arrival now, but everything else that worked in 3.11 should still work. And additionally, very excitingly, as I mentioned in a separate video, Delirium is going to be available in the Xanamods. If you've got any comments or questions though, fire away below. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there. I hope you have a good one.